Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Sam from Historic Travels and welcome to another video. Now guys, on this day, exactly 111 years ago, the RMS TITANIC departed Southampton bound for New York City on her maiden voyage. Now, a couple of years ago, when the anniversary of Titanic came around, and this was the time period when I was just starting, making videos here on YouTube and everything, I was trying to figure out exactly what I could do to commemorate the story of the Titanic for the ship's anniversary. And what I came up with was, I basically made this massive video that covered all of the events of the Titanic from the time the ship left Belfast, going all the way up to the ship's final plunge on April 15th, 1912. And I tried to put as much detail into that video that I could at the time. Now, since we are rapidly coming up on the anniversary of the sinking once again, what I thought I would do for this year's anniversary is basically try to redo that project and put in a lot more detail than what I could do a couple of years ago when I was just starting out here on YouTube. So what I'm attempting to do with this project is make the most complete video that completely documents everything that happened to the Titanic during her maiden voyage and eventual sinking. Now, there is going to be one big difference between what I'm doing in this video and what I did a couple of years ago. This new video is going to be starting up on April 10th, 1912, the exact time that the ship left Southampton. And why am I choosing to do this? Well, because today is April 10th, 2023, and I thought I would release this video on the same day that the Titanic left Southampton. Now guys, this is going to be a massive undertaking, and this is going to be a huge multi-part series. So just because this video is coming out on April 10th, 1912, the final video covering the ship's final plunge and everything will not be ready by the anniversary. This is going to be a multi-part series like I've done with all of my other big projects in the past. So yeah. Anyway guys, hey, with the intro out of the way, let's now start off the new complete Titanic documentary series or timeline series on April 10th, 1912, the day the RMS Titanic left Southampton. It is currently Wednesday, April 10th, 1912, city, Southampton, England. At this location on this specific day, the RMS Titanic, the world's biggest and most luxurious ocean liner, was getting ready to depart for her maiden voyage. On the Titanic's maiden voyage, the ship was ultimately bound for New York City, but the ship was going to make two quick pit stops before it headed all the way out into the open sea of the North Atlantic to head for New York. After the ship left Southampton, around 6 hours later, the ship was due to arrive in Cherbourg, France, where it would pick up and drop off more passengers. And then the next day, April 11th, 1912, the Titanic was going to make its final port of call before heading to New York, a city called Queenstown, located in Ireland. Now, the Titanic was due to leave Southampton at 12 p.m. However, in the hours leading up to departure time, there was still a lot that needed to be done. The biggest thing that the Titanic's crew had to deal with was trying to get all of the passengers that were due to sail on board the ship on board before her scheduled departure time. Now, this wasn't as simple as it sounded, because one big thing that a good number of the passengers sailing on Titanic needed to do before they were allowed to board the ship was go through a health inspection, just to make sure that they weren't carrying any kind of dangerous diseases or head lice or stuff like that. Now, once the passengers cleared the health inspection, they were then allowed to board the Titanic. Now, the health inspection wasn't the only thing the Titanic's crew had to deal with. You see, there were two trains that were arriving in Southampton on the day the Titanic was due to leave port that had a good number of passengers that were due to sail on board the Titanic on them. One train arrived at 9:30 a.m., so this was a pretty good arrival time for, the passengers on the train to make it over to the ship and not cause any issues. However, there was another train that was running really behind schedule. This train was due to arrive in Southampton at 11:30 a.m., just 30 minutes before the Titanic's planned departure time. Now, when the train arrived, the Titanic's crew wasted no time in getting all those passengers to the dock to get them through the health inspection and get them on the ship as quickly as they could. And believe it or not, they were successful. All the Titanic's passengers were successfully on board the ship before the ship was due to leave Southampton. Now, despite what you see in popular Titanic movies like the James Cameron film, for example, the maiden voyage of Titanic really wasn't that big of a deal to everyone who was living in Southampton at the time. You see, the James Cameron movie likes to show the Titanic leaving Southampton with crowds and crowds of people waving and applauding as the ship was leaving port and everything. And while I am sure this did happen a little bit, it was just nowhere near to the scale that this movie shows. And this was because the Titanic was essentially seen to everyone in Southampton at the time as old news. You know, no one really cared that much about Titanic. And this was because even though the Titanic was technically the biggest ship in the world at the time, she was only the biggest ship in the world in terms of weight. The Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, well, the Titanic and the Olympic, as far as how they were built anyway, they were essentially the exact same ship. Their length was the same, you know? So, I mean, to the average Joe, you know, looking at the two ships and everything, they would just see the Titanic as a copycat to the sister ship Olympic, you know? I mean, that's why no one really cared that much about Titanic. The Titanic really wasn't that big a deal of a ship until after she sank. Now, leading up to the Titanic's maiden voyage, the White Star Line encountered two big issues that needed to be resolved before the Titanic could leave Southampton for her first crossing. The first issue they had to deal with was due to the fact that the Titanic simply did not have as much public interest as what the White Star Line expected. Well, the Titanic was actually massively underbooked for her maiden voyage, so the White Star Line was definitely worried about this. And the second issue that they had to deal with, and this issue was by far more serious, was leading up to the Titanic's first voyage, there was a massive coal shortage in England at the time. And this coal shortage was due to the fact that there was a massive coal miner strike in England. And as a result of this strike, no coal was being produced, so of course, you know, there was a coal shortage. Now, this strike had actually been resolved a few days leading up to the Titanic's first voyage, but where it had just been resolved and the miners had just gotten back to work, there was still a coal shortage. Now, in order to combat this coal shortage, many steamship companies, including the White Star Line, were actually canceling their voyages simply because they did not have enough coal to make the journey. Now, the White Star Line decided to use this to their advantage to make sure that the Titanic would sail on schedule and they wouldn't have to cancel her maiden voyage. What the White Star Line did was they canceled several voyages on ships that they had that were due to sail around the time of the Titanic's maiden voyage, and then they transferred all of those ships, passengers, and coal to the Titanic to help, you know, fill up the ship's coal bunkers and put more people on Titanic. And the White Star Line even made deals with other steamship companies, and those companies would give the Titanic their coal and passengers. This way, the Titanic would have more than enough fuel to make it on her maiden voyage, and this would help the White Star Line offset its massive underbooking situation that they had encountered with it. Then, at exactly 12 noon on April the 10th, 1912, with all of her passengers on board and with the assistance of some tugboats that were in the area, the Titanic slowly but surely began to pull away from the Southampton dock. Once she was clear, the Titanic then fired up her engines and began to slowly but surely pull away from the city of Southampton. Now, at first, everything seemed like it was going okay. However, as the Titanic was leaving the harbor, the Titanic passed by some ships that were still tied up to the Southampton dock. And as it was passing these ships, people on the Titanic's boat deck and on the ship's bridge began to hear these loud sounds that sounded like gunshots. It was like pop, pop, pop. And those on the deck of the Titanic ran to the ship's side to see what was going on. And they looked, to their horror, that another steamship that was still tied up to the harbor, well, this ship's mooring lines had snapped. They had broken due to the suction that was created by the Titanic's engines as the ship was sailing by. And this ship, which would later be identified as the SS New York, was now drifting straight towards the Titanic, threatening to actually hit the ship. Now, due to some quick actions by Captain Smith and some other tugboats that were in the area, they were barely, and I mean just barely, able to avoid a collision. This whole incident was actually photographed by a Titanic passenger whose name was Father Brown, and it's his pictures that you're seeing on screen right now. But yeah, this was a very near miss for the Titanic. Now, after this near miss occurred, the Titanic stopped her engines and a quick inspection of the ship was performed. Once they saw that everything with the Titanic was okay, the Titanic then fired up her engines again and headed towards Cherbourg, France. This whole incident delayed the Titanic's departure from Southampton by roughly 30 minutes or so. Following the near miss with the SS New York, the Titanic's voyage from Southampton to Cherbourg went without incident. The voyage took roughly 6 hours or so, and the ship arrived in Cherbourg at 6:30 p.m. Now, it needs to be said that the Titanic was way too large of a ship to actually be able to pull all the way up to the Cherbourg dock. However, the Titanic was within the size limitations to fit in the Cherbourg harbor. The Titanic pulled into the harbor, and then what the city of Cherbourg did was they had two small tender boats. These boats were the Nomadic and the Traffic, and they had these tender boats bring people from the city of Cherbourg out into the harbor where they would then board the Titanic. The Titanic would remain in Cherbourg for roughly 90 minutes or so, and it should be noted that two pretty famous people from the Titanic's passenger list boarded the Titanic in Cherbourg. This includes Molly Brown and John Jacob Astor. Then, at roughly 8 p.m., after the sun had gone down, the Titanic then pulled out of Cherbourg, bound for Queenstown. It should also be noted that this is the time period where one of my personal favorite photos of the Titanic, and as far as I know, the only picture of the ship taken at nighttime, was taken. The photo you see on screen right now shows the Titanic and all of her portholes full of light. I mean, this is just such a very cool photo. After the Titanic left Cherbourg and headed out to sea, everybody on board the Titanic began to settle down for the evening, and everybody on board the Titanic was looking forward to what they hoped would be a successful and pleasant voyage. All right, everybody, well, hey, that concludes the Titanic story from April 10th, 1912. In the next episode, we will talk about the Titanic story and everything that happened to the ship from April 11th all the way up to the iceberg impact on April the 14th, 1912. All right, everybody, well, hey, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure you leave it a like, and if you're new here, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Special thanks to our Captain Level Patreon supporter, Tammy Lee. Thank you so much for all the support.